Kingdoms rise and empires crumble, and the knowledge and wisdom from past ages are lost to the foggy ruins of time. But for genuine seekers of truth, one place stands alone on a hill, shining brightly in the darkness. You, dear listener, have reached the Hidden Citadel.
Hey, welcome to the
Hey,
Hidden Citadel.
you found us again.
Today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to Greg's heart. Was Shakespeare, who was Shakespeare?
Yeah, let's
Was he
examine that.
was he Christopher Marlowe? Was he Francis Bacon?
Hmm?
Was he John Dee?
Hmm?
Was he the Earl of Oxford or whatever
Hmm?
that guy's name was? Was he Bob Dylan who went back in time? I mean, he could have been anybody.
Yeah, was he? What's his name? Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Was he
Good.
actually William Shakespeare? Probably not. That seems to
Probably
be the
not.
consensus.
Yeah.
You want to introduce us to all the possible, you have studied this far longer than I have ever looked into this. This is kind of a recent thing for me to jump in on.
So there's a couple of things that have occurred to me over the years, and it's funny. We're going to talk about this Alan Green guy that did a really interesting take, and he actually utters some phrases that I wanted him to utter, but I feel like he went in the wrong direction.
Really?
Yeah. So we've talked. We're going to cover a couple of words here and a couple of things that we've covered in other podcasts. But here's the main thing: in Shakespeare's writings, he makes such beautiful, articulate, um, memorable phrasing that goes nowhere. It's
Mm-hmm.
adiaphorous. It's morally neutral. It has nothing. No, you don't end it and go, I have a better understanding of life. I have a better understanding of my destiny. I have a better understanding of it. It's just words for words sake. It is beautiful. It is memorable, and it is, in a way, it's encompassing. It can create uh, um, kind of a mulling over, a marinating that you spend hours in it, and still at the end of it have no value. So this is the word that we've talked about before. There's a word called chiasmus in rhetoric, and the interesting thing about chiasmus is, it's it's interesting because it how it's used in rhetoric is not what it really means. How it's used in rhetoric is it means to kind of come in and out of a phrase, starting here, like you're starting on the top of a cliff, and you go into the phrase and you come back to the top of a cliff. Okay, but the word actually means to mark crosswise. And if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
mark something in biblical, in scriptures or in anything else in the time, marking something is measuring it, but it's measuring it in its distance forward. When you're measuring something in its different distance forward, you're making gains on marking your. If you're marking low, where it's going in its complete measurement from where you are to where it's going. If you're like Mark Twain, if you're marking in a distance, is how fast you're getting to a location, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're marking crosswise, you're going nowhere. You're going sideways. You're
Right.
marking in a where you're not going forward. Oh, now the word chiasmus comes from the appearance of cosmos in chaos.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an appearance of cosmos in chaos, it appears that what's happening in chaos is good and is orderly, or as it says in I want to say in Corinthians, it says, where there is order, there is peace, but
Right.
in disorder, there's no peace, right? So
Right.
if you're doing something, all of a sudden you go, oh, that makes sense, but it's actually in chaos. Like, let's say the Elohim, let's say the Nachash, the serpent in the Eden event, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
appearance of cosmos in chaos. What the serpent was saying in the big picture was chaos. What
Mm-hmm.
he was saying to Eve was cosmos, should not be deceived. All right. So then it seems to be in Shakespeare. Shakespeare has a lot of that wonderful phrasing, wonderful things. It's just that it goes nowhere, and it's
Right.
beautiful. Well, who is the author of that? Who is the author of to live your life existentially marked crosswise, go nowhere? Because if you're technically going nowhere, you're
Yeah.
going You're going
Well, you're all
not.
really
You're not.
going in a circle.
You're not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've advanced in a life and gone nowhere. You've not lived up to what you've already attained. You've not made the most of every opportunity. You've not lived in a way that, like, all those Christ-like phrases are not
Right.
applicable to you. All right. So that was always fascinating for me. I was like, well, who would write such things without any real reference to God, except for in in Othello. And a
Right.
friend of mine named Steve Rowe, and I hope he listens to this. He said he has quite a testimony, but he was in prison and he had this he just changed his life while he's in prison. You know, he's following Christ and that sort of thing. But he decided to to really move away from what he had previously done and really dive deep into just educating himself. And so one of
Sure.
the things he loved Shakespeare, so he memorized a portion of Othello, um, but he liked just some of the phrasing and like he could identify with some of the phrasing. And he said it to me once, and what's strange is he said it to me once, and after that conversation, I had 95% of that memorized. He said it once.
Wow.
I was like, why did that stick with me?
There's something about Shakespeare. I have a friend. He's got a memory that's just insane.
Yeah,
And when we were in high school, the first time it happened, we went to see the first Mission Impossible movie.
yeah.
And when we left, he said, "Oh, I really like that part where he said blah 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 blah." And we're like, "Wait a minute, how much of that did you memorize?" And he said, "Well, I don't know."
All of
And then
it.
he just started talking, and he had most of the movie
Yeah.
memorized. By the time we got out of high school, he had all of Shakespeare's everything memorized.
Wow.
He had all the Star Wars movies memorized. He had The Wall by Pink Floyd, the movie memorized. It was like he had all the just Indiana Jones movies, all sorts of crazy stuff he had memorized, and he had most of the Bible memorized. And I was like, how on earth? But there's something about Shakespeare that he was like, I don't know what it was, but it was so easy to just memorize Shakespeare.
So here's the thing. Here's the what Steve said to me. He said, "I there's a part in where Iago is talking." And by the way, there's this guy named Michael McCrone who did this. He had a book called "Brush Up on Your Shakespeare, Brush Up on Your Bible, Brush Up on Your Greek, all that stuff."
Teeth.
Teeth, yeah, and it's he's amazing. But one of the things he points out about Iago is evil for evil's sake.
Sure.
It's almost and I feel like there's even something in his name that
I
because
think that too.
there's no reason why Iago does what he does except for to make chaos. Now,
Yeah.
as as he's already just deceived Othello, he says this: "In following him, I follow but myself.
Uh
Heaven
huh.
is my judge, not I for love and honor, but seeming so for my peculiar end. For in my outward actions doth demonstrate the native act and figure of my heart in complement extern. I will wear my heart upon my sleeve for daws to peck at. I am not what I am." Now,
Mm-hmm.
look at that last line.
Yeah.
When
When the
Abraham,
Jesus
who
God
should
says, "I am that I am."
who should
Yeah.
I say sent me? I am that I
Yeah.
am, right?
Moses. Yeah.
And what does Iago say? I am not what I am, which
Yep.
means I am the inverse or the
Yep.
chaotic version of God, which is I am. Now,
Yep.
this guy Alan
But
Green points
that
out
was fascinating.
again. Alan Green points it out that when Abraham or whatever says, "Who should I say sent me?" and or
Yeah,
sends me,
Moses.
or
Moses
Moses,
said
sorry,
that.
Moses says, "Who should I say sent me?" He says he gave the phrase, and then he says that it also appears in a sonnet that
Yeah, that's
phrase.
true.
All right, but here is Iago, and it's almost like
Yeah,
this
he's
is like
flipping it around.
this is like an autobiography of
Yep.
whoever wrote the Iago
Yep.
character is saying this is who I truly am.
Yeah.
Because look at all the stuff there. When
I
following him, I
know.
follow but myself.
Yep.
Heaven is my judge, but seeming
Yeah.
so for my outward actions that
Yep.
demonstrate the native act and figure of my heart in complement extern. Then I soon after I will wear my heart upon my sleeve for daws to peck at, which is the
I
angels, the birds, like those are crows who eat the flesh after it's been dead. Daws to
So
peck at. And wait, there's one more thing. So it's really interesting that Alan Green guy then also says in the phrasing, it's not just I am what I am. It also has the Hebrew also says will speak, which he
yes,
says
with
it's
Will
then a play on the
Shakespeare.
word, which will
Yeah,
it'd be like will speak would then be will speak shear
yeah,
or will
and
shear speak.
so there's another video I didn't get to send you that he had where he was being interviewed by some guy who calls himself Faust, or maybe that's his real name.
Hmm.
And he was telling in that one about how his real name was Shakespeare,
Yeah, Shaq's
and it
or
didn't
Shaq's
have the
bar.
E.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then they changed it, and now you get all these weird little connections because he added those extra letters
yeah.
in there. But I think some of our viewers probably might not know the mystery
Okay.
because they were told in school William Shakespeare lived in the 1500s. He was part of Queen Elizabeth's court. You know, he wrote a
Yeah,
lot of these plays. But
yeah.
really, what we know about Shakespeare now is he never was part of the court. He
Oh.
never traveled anywhere. He was almost completely illiterate. And
Hmm.
the only signatures we have of his, there's like 5 or 6 of them, and none of them match. And even when they do computer analysis, none of them match the
Hmm.
same person.
Hmm.
There were 36 plays, I think it was, and yet none of the 36 plays actually line up with, um, you know, anything that he was ever published that the actual Will Shakespeare ever published in his life.
Hmm.
There is not one single actual document like an original copy of anything Shakespeare did,
Yep.
and it looks as if um, Bacon and possibly John Dee, the Elizabeth sorcerer,
Hmm.
had something to do with the editing of both the King James Bible and William Shakespeare's plays.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of weird Rosicrucian occultism that's been woven into Shakespeare's play and into the King James Bible,
Hmm.
which kind of explains why the King James only crowd seems to be like a demonic entity
They're
behind it.
aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very
It
aggressive.
makes no sense why you should be aggressive to
No,
someone who's supposed to be like essentially a
I,
brother or sister,
when
you know?
when
Yeah.
I was in New York, I knew a guy that he said, "Yeah, that church down the street, they're a little bit nuts." He said I was a missionary in Romania,
Hmm.
and he said that the King James only people came in and they said not only do you have to learn English so that you can read the Bible, you have to read the Bible in the King James because any translation would be not God's word. And it's like that is so antithetical to the gospel and to the Great Commission
Correct.
that it's like you're saying these people can't be Christians if they don't learn English and then learn Shakespearean English.
And there are problems with the King James, probably more problems with the King James than any other.
Exact. Well, there are more problems with it, and especially when you find out that Francis Bacon and John Dee, who was practically, I mean, the man said he was getting his information, but from angels, but the kind of information he's getting weren't
Yeah.
those good kind of angels,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that goes to my that goes so going to Shakespeare. There's no real logical evidence that he'd have access to kind of perfect detail about the Italian court,
Or the
to
Egyptian court too.
Egyptian
Yeah.
to what a tennis game would be,
Yep.
what a you know what a polo game, all those things that he should have that he's writing about, and
Yep.
he wouldn't be able to like look it up on Google and say, oh,
No.
or AI, tell
Well,
me
and who
what
could he ask? And if
it,
he did ask somebody, how do you know that the information would be accurate? Now, there is the theory that Marlowe and Shakespeare were friends for a while,
yeah.
and it's possible that if that was the case, that maybe he could have asked Marlowe because Marlowe had been a spy, and we know that I guess all the evidence is showing that Marlowe didn't die when they say Marlowe died.
Well, Shakespeare makes reference to Marlowe's death in, I think, either Twelfth Night or Winter's Tale. I want to say Winter's
Yeah,
Tale, and he says it was a great reckoning in a small room, and that was what happened when was it Kit, not Kit, forgot his name because it was Kit Marlowe. Kit
yeah,
is um Christopher Marlowe's nickname, but I forgot what the guy's name was. But he was the one who stabbed him,
yeah,
and so, but Shakespeare makes reference to that, so it's like that's kind of weird too. But the thing
yeah,
that makes Marlowe, I think, really attached to this more so than anybody else is Marlowe's. For if you have if Iago is the autobiography of the real Shakespeare, then Marlowe is the autobiography of somebody that made the first deal with Iago.
yeah,
And if you understand where we're going with this,
yep,
that it's almost like Shakespeare came out at a time of the Renaissance, the rebirth, a
mm-hmm,
time when people were just suddenly making art depicting, the in a lot of ways a kind of a glorification of Christ, of God. There was a lot of these huge that people were like flocking to and wanting to become a part of. Yet Shakespeare came out and said, "All right, I'm going to do the same thing,
mm-hmm. But
but
celebrate man.
I'm going to deceive you. You're not going to know who I am, but I'm
Yep,
going to do the same thing. But it's not going to be God based. It's just going to be
yeah.
beautiful." And really,
Yeah, it's like
and so
sympathy for the devil.
exactly.
You
So
know.
that's where I'm headed. It's all this whole thing is very Luciferian.
Yep.
And it just seems like
Well, and when you
if anybody was going to be Shakespeare, it would be Lucifer. And here's the so you have you know you have these words that will have eternal value to everybody. You have,
mm-hmm.
instead of psalms, you have sonnets.
Yep.
Instead of
It's the inverse of everything
it's the
biblical.
inverse. And it's I who is the one that said that?
And that's why I say
Oh,
that,
Gary Wayne said
yeah.
everything you have in Christianity, you have the
So
opposite, you
when
have
you
the
have
inverse.
Shakespeare over here and the
Yeah,
King James Bible over here,
yeah,
and when you look at the Rosicrucian way of thinking, it's very
yeah,
dualistic. And
yeah.
it's like, okay, we have to have the right eye and the left eye. We have to have the right hand and the left hand. We have to
Yep.
have good and evil, and they have to
Hmm.
be in balance. And it's almost as if somebody said, we're going to take the Bible and we're going to take Shakespeare and we're going to make a complete work that is like the whole of everything. And
Yeah.
like what's strange about it, I don't know, did you get to watch the video of the Oak Island mystery?
I've seen some of that. I don't think I
That
saw.
that guy claimed that I think I posted it on one of the articles, but that
Uh,
guy claimed that he was able to figure out how to find treasure on Oak Island by using Shakespeare's stuff as like a treasure map.
yeah.
And so the Oak Island people that have been digging for treasure, next thing you know, they start digging in those spots where the guy claimed, and all of a sudden they're finding all sorts of stuff. And so this guy claims that Shakespeare was Bacon and that he had a pretty
Francis Bacon,
strong
not
Francis
the meat,
Bacon, not Kevin Bacon,
or the meat,
or the meat.
the succulent morning breakfast meat.
Yes, 6 degrees from Francis Bacon in this one. And
Yeah,
you know what's weird is English bacon is not the same as American bacon, and I don't
yeah.
understand why. I don't understand what American bacon is called in England. And when I
Mm,
went to get bacon while I was over there, it was like not the right kind of bacon. But
no,
it was still good, but I was
yeah,
just like, this is more like country ham or something. It was
yeah,
not the in strips. It wasn't the same thing.
no.
But I digress. My point is he had a very strong um, persuasive argument that Francis Bacon was Shakespeare.
Hmm.
But the other guy, what was his name? We were just talking about him.
Alan
In the other
Green.
Alan Green, who, by the way, used to be the keyboard player for the Monkees, which I thought was an interesting thing to
Yeah,
find out about
yeah.
him.
Uh-huh.
He
And
basically,
didn't he chair the Federal Reserve too?
yeah, probably him. That was
Oh no, it's Alan
Greenspan.
Greenspan. Yeah, okay.
He had a very persuasive argument that I think it was on his video, or I've been watching a lot of these videos,
Mm-hmm.
but somebody, I think it was him, had a very persuasive argument that it was actually Christopher Marlowe that
Mm-hmm.
was Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. What it was then is, if you can argue that Francis Bacon, very persuasively, that Bacon was Shakespeare, if you can
Mm-hmm.
argue very persuasively that Marlowe was Shakespeare, and if you can argue very persuasively that the Earl of Oxford, or Duke, or whatever he was, of Oxford was Shakespeare, then what that's telling me is, and they were all Rosicrucians
Mm-hmm.
and proto Freemasons.
Yeah.
What that's telling me is that this is a conspiracy that their leader, was telling them what to put down and to create this thing, and this what do we tome, or collection of tomes,
Yeah.
the two of them. Then who do you think did that? It was Lucifer,
Yeah. And on top of that, it's
because
interesting
he's the
because,
one that they're communing with in Luciferian religions.
and you could say, all right, if you go with the Marlowe thing, it's really interesting because then what is Marlowe's other work? Why does Marlowe have his other work? Like, why
Well,
does he just,
maybe I didn't send you that documentary, but
well,
there's a whole thing that they showed that Marlowe didn't die,
yeah.
and he actually became a spy, and his death was staged by Queen Elizabeth so that he could go be a spy in Italy.
Mm.
And
Well, that
so
makes sense. Yeah.
so the 36 plays were written while he was working as a spy, but he couldn't publish them under his own name, so he would send them back to Will Shakespeare, who was an actor he knew, and Shakespeare would pass them on to Francis Bacon or whoever
Yep.
else for the treatment, and then it would get published that way.
That makes sense. So here's the thing that's interesting then. So look at the tragical history of life and death of Dr. John Faustus.
Mm-hmm.
What you could okay, you could have Marlowe as just like Faustus, just a guy, like nothing particular, until he makes this deal with the devil. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the nature of the deal? Like, what does he end up with?
Oh
What
yeah,
does
he ends up losing the whole thing.
No, but what is the magic that he gets?
Oh, the ring.
What does the ring make you do?
I can't remember.
Through Pluto's blue fire. And here's the incantation, which
Okay.
Sting comments about in Wrapped Around Your Finger.
Oh
He
yes.
references, right, with Pluto's blue fire and Hecate's three, and that's
Yep.
those a witch, that
Yep.
no eye may thy body see. He goes
Yes,
invisible.
it's
If you are
invisibility. That's
invisible, then
right.
you can Ghost Rider. You are
Yes.
writing. It
Yep.
makes almost sense what you're saying about Marlowe
Totally.
to
Well,
to
here's the
be
other thing
the
too.
conduit for Lucifer. Yeah.
I don't think Marlowe's necessarily the conduit. I think Marlowe is referring to John Dee. I think Dr. John Faustus, or is it
Oh, it's
John?
D.
Is John Dee.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it
Oh,
John Faustus?
yeah,
Johannes?
yeah, it is.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
John Dee is John Faustus,
yeah.
and he's telling the story, because I don't know if you know about John Dee, but basically he had a scryer, and the
Mhm.
scryer's name was why can I never remember what I want to remember? I didn't take my nattokinase, so we can't sponsor the show with
No.
nattokinase. Anyway, I'm going to skip his name, but the guy that was the scryer of John Dee, it'll
Hmm.
probably come back to me in a minute. It was leading Dee further and further and further into debauchery
Yeah,
as they continued their Enochian research. And what
yeah,
happened is, eventually the angels told this guy that was John Dee's partner, yeah, we need to swap wives and perform a ritual,
yeah,
and then we'll get more information. Well, the wives are like, what on earth are you talking about? We don't
yeah.
want to go along with this, but they kind of forced them into it.
Uh-huh.
And from what I understand, the wife of John Dee was like, this other guy is disgusting. I don't want anything to do with him, but they forced her into this situation, and it was like shortly after that their partnership kind of just dissolved, and everything went haywire
Hmm.
after that. And so I'm like, the kind of things that happened to Faustus really are similar to what actually happened in John Dee's actual life. And so
I'll go
I
with
think
that.
I think there's
Yeah.
a real strong case to be made that that's who he's talking about. But I'm thinking you got these three people
Yeah.
that are all well, four people that are all Rosicrucians. You've got D. Well, he's sort of an everything, not just a Rosicrucianist, but he was a high level occultist. So much so that they say that when the Spanish Armada came and the big storm whipped up that destroyed the Armada, it was actually John Dee that somehow caused that storm to
Wow.
happen with his incantations.
Mm.
And so here we got Dee as a high level alchemist
Hmm.
with his partner. I wish I could remember his name. When I'll look it up here in a minute. Then we've got Francis Bacon, who is one of the shadiest, weirdest characters
Hmm.
of that time period that had his hands in a lot of different things. Then you got all these incidental characters like Sir Walter Raleigh, who
Yeah.
eventually they hanged,
Hmm.
and it was almost like they hanged
The
him
Duke
for
of
no real.
Stratford. Yeah.
Him too. There was no real
Yeah.
reason, but there's all this political intrigue happening
Hmm.
at the time,
Right.
and then you end up with the King James Bible, which is far less accurate in its translation than the Geneva Bible that came before it.
Hmm.
And then you have the this total fascination with the Kabbalah, which John Dee had, and
Hmm.
Hebraic
Hmm.
linguistic love,
Hmm.
where everything had to be Hebrew. Well, here's the thing. Remember what we've talked about before is that the Septuagint was the Bible of Jesus, and the Septuagint was the Bible of the disciples.
Right.
And yet once there was a split with the Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church, all of a sudden they were like, no, we got to go with the Latin. Well, by the time it got up to translating it into English, the push was we have to go back to the Hebrew source. Well, there wasn't a Hebrew source because Jesus and the disciples all spoke Greek.
Yeah.
If you were to go back in time and have a conversation with Jesus, you would be talking to him in Greek, maybe
Hmm.
a little bit of Aramaic,
Right.
but the lingua franca at the time was Greek. They
Yeah.
all spoke Greek. They wrote in Greek.
Yep.
Everybody communicated in Greek. There was never a Hebrew New Testament.
Hmm.
But all of a sudden, when the Masoretes, 200 years after Jesus, decided, no, we don't want all this Old Testament prophecy to point to Jesus.
Hmm.
We want to instead make it point to Israel, because at that time they had been kicked out of Israel and they'd lost their ancestral homeland,
Hmm.
so they all wanted to go back. Well, what do? You make all the prophecies about Israel rather than about the Messiah. And so they tried to change a bunch of stuff, and then we end up with a Masoretic text. Well, then the King James, and from the King James on, everything has been based on the Masoretic text and not the actual Bible, which would have been the Septuagint.
Hmm. It's crazy too because like you, the concept here I think we're getting at is like you take it, it does feel very like Luciferian influence in such a way that in the same way that the gospel gets spread, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like the 66 books
Yep.
point to one God. It's like we're gonna have many different people,
Yep. Well,
one person in Shakespeare representing many
yes.
different people. But there's a couple of deceits here that are really interesting. One is that Shakespeare is almost, since its neutrality, apparent neutrality, allows can be in any, like you could go in any nation of the world and talk about Shakespeare and be fine with it.
Yep.
You can't do that with the scriptures. You
No.
can't do that with the Bible. You can't do that in a
No.
court. You can't, because
No.
it turns people off. It, but it's funny, even on Star Trek, you're like, well, have you ever heard Shakespeare in the original Klingon? Like
Right.
he said. Remember they said that. I was like, so it's really interesting. So you have that idea, but then like going back to the idea that that Iago in Shakespeare is really Lucifer's push to add words,
Mm-hmm.
more words to a world that's already
Yeah.
proliferated by words, right? I think in my theory that Hamlet is then truly almost his autobiography, and
Yeah.
it's that he was deceived by the
Yep.
father's brother, like that
Yep.
he should have had his place initially, and
And
then
he
when you
was
get to
displaced.
and then when you get to be or not to be, that is the question. whether it's his noble, and he goes into all those things that he's saying. He's
Mm-hmm.
talking about himself, and he wants the world to know that there is in the injustice of what he feels life
Mm-hmm.
should have been, his existence should have been, he was deceived. And then you go, my favorite thing is like when you go to uh oh, I'm trying to think of where it was. What is a man?
Mm-hmm.
What is a man? Go to
Yeah.
that. Then go to Psalm 8,
Yeah.
and you
They're
see you see a
opposites of each
parallel.
other.
And
Yeah.
then you see Shakespeare quoting Psalm 8
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, but he's morphing it because he gets Polonius to come along and say, "Well, you need to your own self be
Self be
true,"
true, but
and
he's a
the
fool, right? And Polonius,
exactly.
but
And you have no idea how many people I have ran into when I'm talking to them or witnessing to them, and they're like, "Well, the Bible says to thine own self be true." And I'm
no,
like, "No, that's Shakespeare, and that was the
yeah,
foolish character
it,
saying that."
yeah,
But it's basically what he's saying. This is what people think,
yeah,
and this is how people
exactly.
should exist. They should just be
What?
true to themselves.
But you're nailing it right there. What
Yeah.
Shakespeare does in all of his plays is he makes an ultimate way people should think, an
Mm-hmm.
ultimate kind of logic, but it doesn't
Yeah.
go toward heaven. I mean,
No.
even in
But
that,
check this out. When you
but that
take
well
it
that
to its,
that
go
passage
ahead.
in Shakespeare, sorry, the passage in Hamlet, he says in apprehension how like a god. That's his
Yes.
slap in the face
Yeah, it
of
is.
Yahweh.
Yep. But then you take it to its ultimate conclusion, which I believe the ultimate conclusion of this whole Shakespearean mystery is Aleister Crowley.
Yeah,
And what did Crowley say? He was like, as above, so below, which was
hmm
already kind of a phrase that they used. But then he was saying, do what thou wilt. And basically, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. And that will
yeah,
be the whole of the law,
yeah,
you know? And it's like,
yeah.
so there you're talking about, here's the guy that's basically, Crowley figured out all of this stuff, and he figured out how to unite it into its own weird, debauched system. And then what happened after Crowley? World War II happened, and
hmm
the Nazis were influenced by Crowley. The '60s with all of the drug culture and
Yeah,
the rock and roll Satanism and stuff that came along with a lot of that was all
yeah,
pointing back to
definitely.
Crowley,
Yeah,
and a
Jimmy
lot of
Page. Yeah,
Jimmy Page, yeah, Sting even bought Crowley's tarot deck. You know, it's like a
yeah,
lot of these people, and the Beatles, they put Crowley on the Sergeant Pepper's thing, and it's like a
hmm
lot of these people really looked up to Crowley like, man, he was onto something. But then when he died wandering around saying, I don't get it, I don't understand, because he thought that he was the Antichrist, basically.
but it
And then
goes
his
back.
disciples all died weird too, like Jack Parson blows himself up.
Yep.
L. Ron Hubbard starts a cult. You know, it's like all sorts of crazy stuff.
But look, that goes back to what we've talked about before with the tragical history of the life and death of Dr. John Faustus, where he's trying to mock Mephistopheles. Sweet
Mm-hmm.
Mephistopheles, who made the world? And he says,
Yeah.
move me not, which means don't make me mad, because
Yeah.
I can reverse you as well as enhance you.
Exactly.
And so what happens there when he's walking away, when Aleister Crowley's walking away from life and no longer of use to Mephistopheles or Lucifer, he has no meaning, and he's kind of like, wait, what just happened here?
Mm-hmm.
There is that surge of, it's almost, again, it's like an inverse quality of the Holy Spirit, by way
Yeah.
of, not by the Spirit you become more, it's by the Spirit you've become of use and destroyed. You end up being reduced over time rather than enhanced.
Exactly. And that's really what happens. And it goes back to like the alien thing that we talked about before, where
hmm
it's like they had if they're demons, they
hmm
had a glory and it's gradually diminishing even
Yeah,
them. And
yeah,
whenever a person is possessed or whatever, there's a gradual diminishing. Like whenever you read about possession cases, how they go from being like they'll show a picture of somebody before the possession and
yeah,
how they were a happy little kid
yeah,
or a young person or whatever, and then at the end it's like they just look like a shell of themselves,
yeah,
you know. And it's like that's what happens and that's what happened to Crowley. I mean, of course, part of it was he was so riddled with syphilis, and he had gone pretty much insane from that. But it's like
Hitler too.
Hitler as well. Well, I mean,
He had the
we could
syphilis
get
and
into
went
the
insane.
we could go into the whole thing about how all the Hitler spottings that they had in South America
Yeah.
and all that at some point.
I
But
think
mean,
it's confirmed he did have syphilis, and he did try to kill
yeah,
himself. I mean, I don't know if he might not have been successful in killing himself, but
I don't think he was, because the skull, when they tested his skull, it turned out to be the skull of a woman,
oh,
and it
well,
wasn't his skull. And
how
then
about
when they
sanity? Where do we rest on
oh,
sanity?
he was nuts in the all the way along. I mean,
Did I
and
ever tell you? Just it's related, but it's kind of a side. It's kind of a chiasmus. There's a song by Three Doors Down. Those guys are Christians. I didn't realize they were.
Really, I didn't know that.
Recently, they just
That's interesting.
It's called Kryptonite.
Oh, I like that song.
Did we
Yeah.
talk about that
No,
before?
we've never talked
All right.
about that.
So to me, that's a song. It can't be about a woman. It's
No.
got to be about Hitler talking to the German people after World War One.
Oh, there you
Okay.
go.
I walk around the world, ease my troubled mind. I left my body lying somewhere in the sands of time. I watched the world flip to the dark side of the moon, which is what? Insanity. Good.
Yep.
I feel there's nothing I can do. If I go crazy, will you still call me Ubermensch? Which
Yeah, right.
right? That's the
Yeah.
UC's term for Superman.
Yep.
If I'm alive and well, will you be there holding my hand? I'll keep you by my side with my superhuman might. What is superhuman might?
Yeah, right.
Kryptonite. You can't. Kryptonite was the deletion of the superhuman
Yes,
might. So it's like my
exactly.
insanity. My insanity is what my superhuman might is. My
Yep.
kryptonite is both my superhuman might and my
And
undoing. But look at the second verse. Okay. Let's see. You stumbled in. I forgot how the second verse starts. But he said, "You stumbled in and bumped your head." Now, that's the Kaiser, because the Kaiser had a cracked helmet. Remember?
Yep.
If you stumbled in and bumped your head, if not for me, then you'd be dead. I picked you up and put you back on solid ground, which is which was the land of right. How is that about a girl?
Yeah, no, it can't be.
You know, the reparations that were put on Germany after World War One were stuff that debilitated them. And he said, you stumbled in and bumped your head. If not for me, you'd be dead. I picked you up and put you back on solid ground. If I go crazy, will you still call me Superman? Like that's to me, that it's really kind of what we're talking about, but it's like in a strange way, like he's saying, I'm insane.
This goes back to my whole philosophy. I mean, they're Christians now, but we don't know what it was like when they were writing that song.
Yeah,
and a lot of people
about a girl. Like, no, it's not about a girl.
Well, he may not know. A lot of people that write songs, they have a muse that comes upon them and helps them write their songs. They're like, I don't know where the song comes from. It came from my muse. Well, what is a muse? It's an entity of some sort, you know, that you're cavorting with or you know, working in collaboration with. And so it's kind of like people have to be careful. Creativity can be human, but it can also be, you know, superhuman, and it might be coming from somewhere else. So you got to be careful, you know, with that stuff, because the creative action can be a type of witchcraft in a way.
Well, look with Eve. Like, did he instilling new information to what you already knew, and then changing your behavior and changing your belief structure, in which you are then quoting what your influence has been, what your inspiration has been, is now distorting what truth is and making fiction. And that's exactly what happens in those cases, and exactly what happened with Eve.
Yep. But back to the Shakespeare thing,
which is related. Yeah.
Here's another possibility. Let's say there was something demonic being passed around between these people in this secret society, and Shakespeare himself might have been a part of this. And so, okay, I'll give you two examples of a good side of this, and then I'll get into my theory.
Okay.
My great aunt Motzi was completely illiterate. She was dying of tuberculosis, coughing up blood, everything was really bad. She
Wow.
didn't know the Lord. Some of her friends said, "Look, we need to take you to church so that they'll pray for you and you'll be healed." And I learned this story. I was a little kid and I was running around. We were all over at Aunt Motsy's house and I was running around with the other kids. And the next thing I know, this arm reaches out and grabs me and she pulls me in. And the funny thing is, whenever I see the witch from the original Snow White with the apple,
Yeah.
that's just kind of reminiscent of how I felt when
Wow.
Aunt Motsy grabbed me and she pulled me in, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm dead now." And she says, "Son, do you know that Jesus heals people?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "True. I had TB and it was so bad I was coughing up blood, but they took me down to the church and they prayed for me, and I was down at that altar, and all of a sudden I felt a tingling on the top of my head, and it went all the way down my body, and then it left out the soles of my feet,
Mm-hmm.
and I was completely healed from TB."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then she let me go, and I went back to playing. Well, we're driving home in the car, and I said, "Dad, what's TB?" And he was like, "Tuberculosis. Where did you hear about that?"
Does this mean we're
And
not getting donuts?
yeah, right. And I said, "Aunt Motsy told me." And he's like, "What did she tell you?" And so I told him, and he said, "Yeah, that's true. Grandma said she was dying and that there was really no hope for her at all, but then they took her down and prayed for her and God healed her." So after that, she said, "I needed to know how to read my Bible
Yeah.
because I couldn't read and I never went to school." She grew up in rural Kentucky and was completely illiterate.
Wow.
So she prayed and she said, "God, they say the Bible is your word. I need to be able to read it. If you want me to read it, make me literate." And immediately, God made her literate and she could read the Bible. Now, people may say, "Well, that sounds far fetched." But there's a second case of this happening. And if you know the musician Johnny Lang, Johnny
Mhm.
Lang was completely illiterate. He was dyslexic. He couldn't read. And so his parents were like, "We need to push you into something you can do.
Yeah.
So learn the guitar." So
Yeah.
Johnny Lang started learning the guitar, but at the same time, he was also getting involved in witchcraft.
Mhm.
And he was getting really heavily involved with it.
I didn't know
Well,
that. Yeah.
he had a girlfriend whose parents were Christians, and the dad was like, "Johnny, I'm praying for you." And Johnny said one night he felt like there was a presence in the garden outside of his girlfriend's house that picked him up and chucked him against a tree, and he fell off the tree, and he knew it was God, and he was like, "You're going down the wrong path and you need to change."
Yeah.
And he said it was that point he went in and asked who would be his father-in-law, "Can you pray for me?" And God delivered him of everything and saved him. Well, he had the same experience. A couple months later, he was like, "God, I really want to read my Bible, but I'm illiterate,
Mhm.
I'm dyslexic,
Mhm.
there's no way I can read." And instantly, God took away his dyslexia and gave him the ability to read. And he said the Bible was the first book I read, and I just read as much of it as I could. And so that's two accounts where that happened. Well, the inverse of that meant, what if that's what happened to Shakespeare?
Yeah.
That somehow he got possessed by an entity that used him to crank out all of these manuscripts. So it's like, maybe it wasn't Marlowe, maybe it wasn't Bacon, maybe it actually was Shakespeare, but he was a possessed individual.
To me, it's almost like, okay, almost like, how the 66 books point to God. It's almost like making it in a different theory than what you're saying, taking all these guys and having them all working together to make it look like it's one guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, under that theory, if Shakespeare was just really nobody, but his name was almost like God will speak, or
Yeah.
that kind of thing, that you're taking this guy who is almost kind of insignificant, but giving him maybe even that's how the Antichrist will emerge. It's just kind of like all of a sudden
Maybe.
just a guy, and he just becomes universally accepted for
Yep.
no reason.
Yeah,
Like
and
it's just kind of like,
everybody will
but
love him.
But look at some of the conquerors. Look at just some of the like the Hitlerian guys or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Hitler
Alexander
was
the
a failed
Great.
art student, and really, and
Yep.
even he wasn't all that likable. But he's
No.
put in the right place at the right time, saying the right things,
Yeah,
stirring
and
the hearts. Like
I
it became,
remember I remember back in the 90s there was a documentary where it was when they first started getting um, the type of technology where computers could analyze voices,
yeah,
and they did a voice study on Hitler when he was giving a speech
yeah,
as opposed to Hitler when he was just talking to people,
yeah.
and the computer said those are not the same person.
Wow, yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty crazy.
But I like your theory that you have a Faustus influence by way of a Luciferian influence, and then it goes from Marlowe to Bacon to Dee, and then gets assigned
Yeah, to Shakespeare.
To a Shakespeare that you're looking back and going, this is a nobody. Who are we talking
Yeah.
about here? But there's so much mystery involved that it won't that makes the other guys invisible.
Yep, pretty much. They
You
kind of
know?
lose their whole their own identity in
Yeah,
a way. I
yeah.
want to find the John Dee's partner.
And it wasn't Bacon the one that says like knowledge is power, and
I
then
believe so. Yeah.
yeah, and also the power corrupts absolutely or something. But it's like his knowledge is power kind of thing. It really makes it seem like
Well, and he also said everyone cut foot loose. Oh wait, no, that's the other
oh,
Bacon.
that's right. Yeah, Kevin Bacon always like, when are we gonna dance? When
Yeah,
are we
right.
gonna dance?
When are we
Is it
gonna
time to
dance?
dance? I always feel like I, I always wanted to see like a Saturday Night Live
Oh, it's
version with
Edward Kelly.
Ed
Edward
Kelly.
Kelly
Oh, okay.
was not Kevin Bacon. Was John Dee's scryer.
Scryer.
So the way that it worked is John Dee would perform the rituals, Kelly would look into the obsidian bowl,
Mm.
and then he would say, "Okay, I see a flaming character that looks like this. Write it down. Okay, that's an H sound." And
Yeah.
that's how they came up with their Enochian language. Basically give and the sad thing is this guy that we watched, he's pretty much convinced that they were actual angels. Of course, in his idea, the angelic creatures that were also possibly aliens or extraterrestrials. When you watch his other video, he
Yeah.
talks about how he was visited by aliens, and then that's how he got all this information about Shakespeare.
Does he make them both benevolent? Like, is he just
Yeah, oh
like,
yeah, they're
oh,
all
these are?
good. Yeah, really
That's
good
so funny.
helpers that want to
That's
help
so
you
funny.
learn things. And it's like,
Until
no, I
you
don't think so.
until you move them, move me
Until
not,
you, yeah,
move me
exactly.
not, Faustus.
Well, I think that basically brings us to I wanted to show you my loot.
Oh, I thought you were gonna be. I thought it was a liar because that would make
Well,
it.
it
That
would
would
be a lie. Yeah,
it
it's
would,
on the wall, the liar.
it would make more sense.
Yeah, definitely. Now I feel very Shakespearean.
Oh, I thought we were gonna make a song.
We
could-
should.
we should.
We should put like
Right
one
on
of the
the spot
sonnets to
Right on the spot here.
No, but we have to pitch our little pedal, our pedal pitch
Oh,
to
it is
Josh
time.
Scott.
It is that
It
part
is
of the
totally
show.
time.
Josh Scott, you've entered the realm of the Hidden Citadel,
That's right.
and the pedals that should be a whole line called the Hidden Citadel pedals.
That's right.
And you want
we
to go
have
first?
so many good ideas.
You go first.
What was the pedal that I pitched you? The shaky. It's got to be a shaky pedal. So a tremolo. I'm thinking like a tremolo that you can adjust with the expression pedal so you can speed up and slow down the tremolo, which I don't know of an auto or an auto speed tremolo pedal. You know, and it could be the Shakespeare tremolo pedal that as you wah it, it basically whoop, 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 you know, and you can get sounds like the Three Stooges out of it.
I see, and my idea, Josh Scott, would be the sonnet. And in the sonnet, every phrase that you do, it repeats the end of the second line every time.
Oh, there you go.
So you go da 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 da. It does it. It repeats it. It's a kind of a complex ecosystem.
That
So-
would be really
And
cool,
so
actually.
it makes it makes the second phrase and repeat every time, just like in a rhyme.
That's so cool. That would
Yeah.
be so neat because, like, when you're playing along, you would hear. It would be akin to the Prophet song by Queen,
Yes.
but
And
with
now
a.
I know, and now I know.
But it would be different than that. It would be, and now I know, blah 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 blah, and then you would hear the other harmony coming
Yes.
in.
It
Oh, that would
delays it.
be
So
yes, that
it
would be
holds it for a second and then delays it
yeah.
in a second.
So,
That'd be
so it's
cool.
kind of like a delay with an extra long, like longer than what you normally would get on a delay pedal.
Yeah, it's like the Edge from U2. It's I still haven't found one I'm looking 8 instead of
Yes,
4.
yeah,
Because it's got a double.
that's it. All right, people, if you love us. Oh, and I did send Josh, I tagged him on some of the earlier episodes that have just come out
Yeah.
that have our, that we've been pitching stuff to him. So hopefully, maybe
on,
he'll
Josh.
start to, yeah,
Come
come
to the
on board.
Citadel.
You need to be in the Citadel.
Come find us.
I think you would be perfect here.
Yes.
Anyway, we need to plug some stuff, and
Yeah.
one of the things that we have is a blog, and our blog, I just put an article, basically my thinking on the Shakespearean conundrum, and I think, Greg, it would be so cool if you would write all this up and throw it up as a blog, as another blog post,
I'd love that.
like a part 2
Yeah.
of the Shakespearean thing, and that would be really cool. But go to our blog, it's hiddencitadel4.wordpress.com, and we have topics on there that cover so much crazy stuff, and it's growing every day, so go check that out. If you want to, you can go buy one of our t-shirts at redbubble.com. Just search for the Hidden Citadel, and you'll find our store and all of our designs. There's so many different ones, and we've got a new shirt called the Yuffie, which is like our current favorite shirt, and you need
Yes,
to
it
go
is.
get it. And Yuffie is an abbreviation for "evil will find you."
From
And
Proverbs 11:29.
yeah, if you look for good, you'll be blessed. But if you look for evil,
Evil
will find you.
You.
and that's the sad thing about people like John D. and
Marlowe.
Aleister Crowley, Marlowe, all these people that get involved with this. This is, and I live here in the South, and I don't know what
Kenneth
it's like
Copeland.
for. Yeah, right. I don't know what it's like in New York right now, but there's a massive resurgence in Freemasonry
Yeah.
down here, and I see it over and over and over, and it's like people, they start out as just a club, but the higher you get, the more further away you get from the actual God of the Bible,
Yeah.
and the more you realize that you're serving Lucifer. And by the time you get into the Shriners or the Scottish Rite or any of these groups, you're basically a full-blown Luciferian, but you don't even realize that the Lucifer you're serving is Satan, and that's the adversary, and it's not a good organization to get involved with. Stay away from the occult, people. It's not
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
But if you really want a good book, go buy the Encyclopedia of Weird Crap from Amazon or Barnes and Noble, because we would love you, and we would love it if you would buy our book.
It covers everything on this show. Everything.
Pretty
that we're doing.
much. And more stuff we
more.
haven't even got to yet, like
Pictures that we don't even show.
Yep.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, it's very Shakespearean.
Yes.
All right, people, stay tuned. We will catch you next time in the Hidden Citadel.
His night is coming.
The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will soon return.